The crystalline palace of Velshara defied every architectural principle Ethan had learned in officer training, which made sense given that it hadn't been built by engineers, but grown over centuries by Azurian royalty, channeling their species' collective will into matter. The walls shifted between translucent and opaque, catching starlight and distributing it through chambers that seemed to exist in more dimensions than his visual cortex could comfortably process. Beautiful, certainly. Also deeply unsettling in the way that genuinely alien things were unsettling. A reminder that humans were the newcomers here, still learning the galaxy's grammar. The Convergence feast occupied what the translation matrix called the Hall of Reflected Intentions, which Ethan suspected meant something more poetic in the original Azurian. 300 beings from 47 species filled the space, seated at tables arranged in patterns that probably encoded diplomatic relationships he wasn't senior enough to interpret. The air hummed with conversations in frequencies both audible and not. Translation implants working overtime to convert meaning across the gaps between different evolutionary paths. Ethan occupied a small table with two other junior liaisons, a Cravathi whose name translated roughly to patience in waiting, and a silicon-based entity that communicated through light patterns and preferred no name at all. They'd been making small talk about trade route efficiency for the past hour, which was exactly as exciting as it sounded. First Convergence, Patience in waiting asked, their scales shifting to a color that indicated friendly curiosity. Is it that obvious? You keep watching the Queen. Not accusatory, just observational. Everyone does at their first feast. She has that effect. Ethan hadn't realized he'd been watching. But Patience was right. His attention kept drifting to the high table where Queen Mir'thala presided over the gathering, with the kind of presence that made everyone else seem slightly less real by comparison. She was taller than most Azurians, her skin shifting through shades of purple so deep they approached black, threaded with patterns of silver that might have been decorative or might have been scars. The crystalline crown growing from her skull caught light and bent it into shapes that seemed almost deliberate, almost communicative. She'd been queen for 300 cycles, according to the briefing materials. She'd unified a fractured world, survived 3 assassination attempts, brokered the peace that allowed humanity to even attend these gatherings. She was legendary in the way that people became legendary. Equal parts achievement and mystery, with rumors filling the gaps that facts couldn't reach. She's impressive, Ethan said, which felt like calling a supernova bright. She is power itself, the silicon entity pulsed, its light patterns sharp with emphasis. We are all here because she wills it. The Convergence exists because she maintains it through force of presence alone. Sounds lonely. Both his companions went quiet. The kind of quiet that suggested he'd said something either very insightful or very stupid, and they hadn't decided which yet. Before Ethan could clarify, the hall's ambient sound changed. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they modulated, became aware of themselves, performative. He looked up and found the Queen rising from her seat. She moved with grace that seemed unlikely for someone her size, descending from the high table and walking through the hall. Beings shifted to watch her pass, some bowing, others making gestures of respect that varied wildly across species. She was walking toward Ethan's table. "Oh no," he said quietly. "Oh yes," Patience in waiting replied. "Good luck, human." The Queen stopped at their table, and Ethan stood because sitting, while she loomed over him, seemed like the worst possible option from a dignity standpoint. Standing, he still had to look up. Her eyes were the most disconcerting part, not cruel or cold but vast, like looking into deep space and having deep space look back with intention. "Commander Cross." Her voice carried easily despite the hall's size, rich and layered with harmonics that his translation implant struggled to fully capture. "You are human." It seemed like an observation rather than a question, but he answered anyway. "Yes, Your Majesty. I am told your species has been in space for barely a century. Yet here you are, at the Convergence, negotiating trade agreements with civilizations older than your recorded history. She tilted her head slightly, and her crown caught light in a way that made his eyes water. Tell me, do you find this intimidating? Terrifying, actually. But I'm told fear is a good motivator for paying attention. Several nearby beings made sounds that might have been laughter. The queen's expression didn't change, but her skin shifted to a slightly warmer purple. May I join you? Ethan gestured to the empty seat across from him, hoping his hand wasn't shaking visibly. The queen sat with fluid grace, and her retinue, 4 armored Azurians who'd followed at a respectful distance, arranged themselves in a loose perimeter. Patience in waiting, and the silicon entity had suddenly discovered urgent business elsewhere. I have wanted to speak with you, the queen said. Your reports to my council have been refreshingly honest. Most diplomats tell me what they believe I wish to hear. You tell me what you observe, even when it's unflattering. I'm not senior enough to be diplomatic, Ethan admitted. They sent me because I'm expendable if I mess up. And yet you have not messed up. Curious. She accepted a crystal glass from an attendant, filled with something that glowed faintly. Tell me about your world, Commander. I have read the reports, but I wish to hear it from you. What is Earth like? They talked through the next course about Earth, its oceans, its chaotic weather patterns, the strange human tendency to build cities in geologically unstable areas. The queen listened with attention that felt genuine rather than polite, asking questions that suggested she'd done more than just read official reports. Other dignitaries occasionally approached the table, but retreated when they sensed the conversation had depth. Then the queen leaned forward slightly, her expression shifting to something that might have been amusement. I have a question about your species, a curiosity, if you will. Of course, Your Majesty. I am told humans place great importance on what you call romantic love, that you form pair bonds not for reproduction or political advantage, but for emotion alone. This seems inefficient, yet you persist in it. Her skin shifted through patterns that might have been genuine curiosity. Tell me, Commander Cross, who do you find attractive? What is beauty to a human? The hall went quiet. Not suddenly, more like a wave of silence spreading outward from their table as conversations faltered and attention focused. Ethan felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, some of which weren't technically eyes at all. It was clearly meant as light conversation. A powerful queen amusing herself with the answers of a young species. Her courtiers smiled in anticipation, probably expecting him to stumble through an answer about symmetry or pheromones, or to offer empty flattery about Azurian superiority. He could take the easy path, give a diplomatic non-answer, make a joke, deflect. Instead, he looked at her, really looked, and decided truth was less dangerous than calculation. My species finds beauty in contradiction, he said quietly. The queen's skin shifted color, a ripple of darker purple threaded with silver that spread from her crown downward. Her retinue tensed slightly. The hall had gone from quiet to absolutely silent, the kind of silence where even breathing felt intrusive. Ethan had committed now. No retreat, only forward into whatever diplomatic incident he was creating. We find beauty in strength that doesn't need to prove itself, he continued, keeping his voice steady. In power that chooses gentleness, in wisdom that knows when to listen instead of speak. He met her eyes, those vast spaces that held more than eyes should be able to hold. I've been on your world for 6 months, Your Majesty. I've read the histories. I know what it took to unify Velshara. I know about the wars that ended not because you won them, but because you convinced your enemies that peace served them better. I know about the 3 assassination attempts that you survived not through superior guards, but because you refused to rule from behind walls. Her expression hadn't changed, but her skin continued its color shifts, patterns he couldn't interpret but which were clearly significant given how her retinue watched them. You asked what humans find attractive. We find beauty in the weight people carry that no one else sees, in the cost of decisions that save lives and the grief of decisions that couldn't, in the kind of strength that bears responsibility for millions while still treating a junior human diplomat with respect instead of dismissal. He paused, aware he was either about to create an interstellar incident or something else entirely. When I look at you, Your Majesty, I see someone who carries galaxies in her eyes, not metaphorically, actually. The weight of worlds, the light of stars, the darkness between them. I see power, yes, but I also see exhaustion, pride in what you've built and sorrow for what it cost. I see someone who can't ever just be herself because she has to be the queen every moment of every day. And I think humans would find that beautiful, not the crown or the power, the person underneath it, the one who carries burdens she can never set down. The silence stretched. Somewhere in the hall, something that might have been a glass or might have been a being made of glass shattered against stone. No one moved to clean it. Queen Mir'thala's skin had gone through colors Ethan suspected were significant, deep indigos threaded with silver, patterns that spread across her visible skin like water flowing upward. Her crown seemed to pulse faintly, though that might have been the light. "You see me." Her voice had changed. No longer the formal tone of a queen making conversation, but something rower, stripped of performance. "Not my position. Not my accomplishments, me." Ethan swallowed against a throat that had gone dry. "Yes, Your Majesty, I see you." For several heartbeats she didn't respond. Then she made a gesture, sharp, decisive, and her retinue immediately withdrew. Not just stepping back, but retreating to the far corners of the hall, taking other nearby courtiers with them. Within moments, she and Ethan sat alone at the table while hundreds watched from distances too far to hear, but close enough to witness. "Do you know how Azurian royalty is chosen?" she asked quietly. "I've read the summaries, something about collective consciousness and burden-bearing. The summaries are inadequate." She reached up and touched the crystalline crown with one hand, the first time he'd seen her acknowledge it directly. "We do not inherit rule by blood, we inherit it by capacity. Those rare individuals who can interface with our species' collective consciousness, without their minds breaking, become capable of bearing the crown. Literally." She tapped the crystals, and they rang with a sound like distant bells. "These are not decoration, Commander. They are the solidified thoughts, emotions, and memories of my people. I feel them constantly. Every hope, every fear, every petty grievance and profound joy. Millions of minds pressing against my own, every moment of every day." Ethan's chest felt tight. "That sounds like torture." "It is duty." Her skin shifted to darker colors, patterns of what might have been grief. "I am never alone. Never truly myself. I cannot separate my thoughts from theirs, my desires from their needs. When I sleep, I dream their dreams. When I wake, I carry their worries. I am Queen Mir'thala, vessel of the Azurian collective will. But I have not been simply Mir'thala in 300 cycles. Does anyone know? Your advisors, He stopped, realizing the answer. "They know the mechanics, they do not understand the experience." She looked at him with those galaxy-holding eyes. "In 300 cycles, no one has ever described what they see when they look at me the way you just did. They see the crown, the power, the achievements. They see the queen. But the exhaustion, the sorrow, the weight," her voice caught slightly. "You are the first being to acknowledge what it costs." Ethan didn't have a diplomatic response to that. Didn't have any response except the obvious question. "Do you ever get to just be yourself, just Mir'thala?" The question did something to her. Her skin cycled through rapid color changes, patterns that her distant attendants would later describe as unprecedented in royal history. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I do not remember what myself means anymore." They sat in silence, while the weight of that admission settled between them like a physical thing. The feast continued around them in hushed tones, but their table existed in its own pocket of space, separate from the performance of diplomacy. "Would you like to find out?" Ethan asked finally. She looked at him, confused. No protocol, no audiences, No queen and junior diplomat, just two people who are far from home and tired of pretending. He gestured to the empty chairs at their table. A conversation, that's all, if you want. Queen Mir'thala studied him for a long moment. Then she reached up and removed the delicate circlet that sat atop her crystalline crown, not the crown itself, which she couldn't remove, but the formal marker of her authority during the convergence. She set it on the table between them with careful precision. "I am Mir'thala," she said, "not a proclamation, just an introduction." Ethan extended his hand in the human gesture of greeting. She looked at it, perhaps accessing cultural databases through her neural link, then carefully placed her hand in his. Her skin was warm, textured differently than human skin, and colors rippled across it at the contact. "Ethan," he said, "just Ethan." Her hand tightened slightly on his, "Just Mir'thala." They talked through the rest of the feast and into the early hours of morning, long after other guests had departed. About small things, favorite foods, strange customs, the particular loneliness of being the only representative of your kind in a room. About large things, duty, sacrifice, the weight of decisions that affect millions. About the space between those extremes where actual people existed, messy and complicated and tired. Dawn light filtered through the palace's crystalline walls as the last attendants cleared the tables around them. Mir'thala looked different in this light, smaller somehow, more present, less like a monument and more like a person who'd been playing a role for too long. "This changes nothing diplomatically," she said, though her voice suggested she knew that wasn't entirely true. "You understand that?" "Of course, Your Majesty." "Mir'thala," she corrected. "For now, while it's just us, Mir'thala." "Mir'thala," he agreed. As he stood to leave, protocol couldn't be completely abandoned, she called after him. "Commander Cross." He turned, "Thank you." The words carried weight that could anchor stars. "For seeing me." Ethan nodded, unable to trust his voice, and left the hall. Behind him, the queen of the Azurian Empire sat alone at an empty table, her crown catching the morning light and scattering it into patterns that might have been hope, or might have been grief, or might have been both at once. Sometimes being seen was the greatest gift one person could offer another. Sometimes truth cut deeper than any diplomatic victory. And sometimes, in the vast darkness between stars, two lonely people found connection in the simple act of acknowledging each other's humanity, regardless of species. The convergence would continue for 3 more days. Trade agreements would be negotiated, alliances would be reinforced, and the careful dance of interstellar politics would proceed as it always did. But in one small corner of that vast diplomatic machine, something had changed. A human who didn't know better had looked at power itself and seen the person crushed beneath it. And a queen who had forgotten what it meant to be simply herself had, for a few hours, remembered. It was a small thing in the grand scheme of galactic politics, but small things, given time and attention, had a way of becoming something larger. Seeds planted in crystalline soil, growing toward light that hadn't existed before someone thought to look for it. The universe was vast and cold and indifferent, but within it, occasionally, two beings would find each other across impossible distances and recognize something essential: that everyone, regardless of power or position, carried weights no one else could see. And that sometimes the greatest act of courage was simply admitting those weights existed. Queen Mir'thala returned to her duties. Commander Cross returned to his negotiations. But neither forgot the conversation that happened when crowns were set aside and truth was allowed to exist without performance. And in the careful, complex choreography of interstellar relations, that memory became a foundation upon which something unexpected might eventually be built. Not romance necessarily, not even friendship in the conventional sense, but recognition, connection, the knowledge that somewhere in the galaxy someone saw